everyone. Thank you for joining our Lunch and Learn today on financial wellness. We have a couple of upcoming events, as you can see listed on the screen. There are virtual group fitness classes going on Monday through Thursday, and you can register for those on Link to Health. Our next Lunch and Learn will be July 31st, and it will be on physical activity. The COVID-19 resources are still available on the University Wellness site if you would like to check those out. And the Staying Calm and Well for Early Adolescence webinar series takes place Wednesdays at 10 a.m. and I believe it just started this week, so you can check out the link there for more information. During the presentation, if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. Our presenter today is Jay Linder. Jay, a founder of COPEC and current CEO of Retirement Strategies, has provided financial advice to individuals and employees of The Ohio State University for over 25 years. Retirement Strategies, a local fee-based financial planning and wealth management company, works with individuals to help them meet their financial goals, manage investment assets, and ultimately retire with confidence. A graduate from The Ohio State University with a degree in corporate finance, Jay is also a certified financial planner, a chartered life underwriter, and a chartered financial consultant. Jay, you can take it away.
Thank you, Nicole. And can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
And are you able to see the screen now? My screen?
We cannot see your screen right now.
Now.
Oh wait, yes, we can see it there.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much, Nicole. And actually, I am going to go ahead and give a video here. Hello, everybody. Hey, thanks for the introduction, Nicole. And just let everybody know that we are here on behalf of COPEC, Central Ohio Professional Education Council. What COPEC is a nonprofit that provides education to the community. It's just an education opportunity as best we can to bring you all types of topics, and for some of the financial stuff, I'm able to help you out here, and I appreciate the opportunity to do that. I want to make one caveat, Nicole. I am on a Wi-Fi. I should have no problem with my connection, but if I do get lost for some reason, be patient. I can get back on pretty quick, but unfortunately, I'm on Wi-Fi today. So I'll go ahead and get started here, and then I believe I heard you earlier mention that you're going to try to do chat questions if anybody has those for later, and so we'll try to monitor that as well. Well, for the program today, we're going to try to go into a couple basic pieces of information. We'll skip over these, and really kind of getting into the idea of budgeting, some really key components that everybody needs to really talk about and look at. To make sure that you're staying on top of this and being able to weather storms, whether it's short-term issues or long-term job loss. And then that's what we're going to talk about really in the second part, which is some of the key things that you can look into and take note of if you're in that situation where you have a job loss, and ways that we approach that and help our clients through those situations. So first of all, on budgeting, the biggest thing that we can say about budgeting, there's lots of great resources. I know Apprizin is through the EAP as far as a resource. They do a great job as far as helping you. But really getting educated is key. Understanding how finances work, cash flow, those types of things, and really clarity. Education and clarity, in my opinion, are really very close. The more that you look at something, the more you become comfortable with it and the more that you're aware of it. And so usually for budgeting education, clarity is probably 75% of it. It's not rocket science really that we're dealing with there, but it is something that you really need to just view on a regular basis and stay on top of that. So secure and advocate. I'm a big believer of this, that unless it's kind of like a workout regimen or starting to try to get new habits, having somebody that you are accountable to, somebody that will say, hey, by the way, are we going to get together and do our monthly update on our budgeting and see where we're at? we always talk about in the past, there used to be investment clubs. For those that are comfortable talking about finances with each other, you may want to consider that regarding budgets, because regardless of if you're in debt, if you're at a negative cash flow, or if you're doing well but you want to do better, having that positive reinforcement and somebody that can collaborate with you on that. I always talk about this a little bit as far as whatever you want to do in life. Sometimes you have to expose your frailty or your inner flaws to somebody to really get better. And so a lot of people, they don't like to share that I'm trying to fix my budget or something like that. But if you can find one or two people that you're willing to open up to, you'd be shocked how much progress you can make by allowing that. If you don't have somebody close, do it with a spouse, or actually, if you don't have a friend, do it with a spouse, do it with a sibling. But at the end of the day, there's financial counselors, there's financial advisors that you can interact with as well to get that kind of support. Clarify where you are with the current spending. We'll get into that a little bit. Confirm surplus and deficit. That's a key. Unless you have a surplus cash flow, you really are in a struggle there. And deficit, a lot of times people aren't sure they're in a deficit until all of a sudden they look at their credit card statement and it's like at $5,000 or $10,000 or $2,000 or wherever you're at. They're like, how did that happen? Well, because you're supplementing your cash flow with that credit card. And then at the end of the month, you're trying to pay it off. And then eventually you're like, well, I can only pay off half of it. Or I can, all of a sudden you're starting to get in debt because that budget is at a deficit. Handling credit cards and debts, that is key to making sure the better you are with your credit, your FICO scores, understanding all of those things, lower interest rates, the better off you are with your cash flow, your expenses, whether it's a mortgage, car payment. It's amazing how those things are very tied hand in hand. Create a positive cash flow emergency fund. We'll talk a little bit about that. Credit report accuracy. Make sure you're confirming that you're not getting bad FICO scores or bad reports because of inaccuracy. So staying on top of that. Pay down debts if possible. Obviously, that is a key, and there's good debts, bad debts. We won't go into that too much today. And then fund retirement and other goals. Try to stay on track, because little pains today with the cash flow are magnified in retirement. So make sure you keep that retirement focus no matter what, and you're continually providing a savings strategy for that, and try not to take withdrawals if you can help it. Obviously, if you have to survive, you have to, but trying to stay on target there is going to be key. Some budgeting tools. These are things, whether it's an advocate, that could be a tool or a resource, but what are some of these other key things you can look into? We have a lot of people we work with that just use spreadsheets, and they just write things down. And I actually have been doing budgeting on my own for 25 years, and I just use a spreadsheet. Keep it simple, but you write down certain things. And to me, I like to write down the bigger expenses and just for some of the variable expenses, just a bigger number. And I'm not going to get into that too much today, but I just use a spreadsheet. There's all these credit card expense tracking tools. If you really find one that you like, and if most of your expenses go through that one, that's a great way to do it. Retirement planning tools, account aggregation and spending tools. There's a lot of resources out there. And if you're working with an advisor, one of the things that is really neat with the financial independence analysis is that it is a great test to verify if you are on track with your accuracy for expenses. And so a lot of times that is something that really helps raise its ugly head of a reality that if you say your budget is going to be saving $500 a month, and at the end of the year your bank account didn't go up by $6,000, well, then there's obviously a flaw in our budget. So when we're working on these long-term financial independence analysis, if you don't see that bank account go up and that's what was budgeted, we got to figure out why. And usually it is an individual's understanding of what they're budgeting and the reality versus what they think they're spending. Couple notes, track fixed expenses, track variable expenses, annual expenses, that track the unique non-budgeted expenses, luxury items. And when you're done through this whole process, figure out which expenses are a luxury and which is a need. So back to fixed expenses, your mortgage, your auto payments, your utilities. I consider these expenses all of the things that you must pay to keep your basic standard of living, having roof, clothing, food, and things that you need to do to stay healthy, whether it's lunches or whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But these are fixed expenses that you need. Variable expenses are the little bit of luxuries that you may have, that you going out for entertainment. I mentioned lunches a few seconds ago. Maybe instead of eating out, you pack your lunch, and you can save a couple $100s a month by doing that. Dining out, gifts, all these different expenses that many times you don't track. And so you can either track them as a lump sum, like, hey, look, I've got $2,000 this month to spend on variable expenses, or you can do line item. It really is up to you. Annual expenses, a lot of times people forget. Just this week, I wrote a check for my life insurance. So that's an annual expense where you need to put it in your budget. I don't pay it monthly because it's cheaper to do it annually, but it's harder to keep track of these things. So I actually, on my projections, I actually have a big payment that has to go out for that policy or taxes or whatever it is that you're doing. And then the unique non-budgeted expenses, which are things like holiday gifts and down payments for a new car and travel and those types of things. Try to put those in there. So back to my example of, if you're going to save $500 a month, but you're going to spend $3,000 on a trip, well, then at the end of the year, you should net at a positive $3,000. So it's really getting comfortable with those. Tighten on luxury items, but finding out what is leakage. And I really, really believe this. I bet you most everybody I talk to, they probably have anywhere from 10 to 30% that just gets spent. And if you ever ask them, looking through the credit card report, they're, I can't believe I spent this much on that and this much on that. And then you start adding them up and you're like, I didn't need all that stuff. I didn't need whatever it is. And that goes back to clarity again. And all of a sudden, when you're aware of what that all adds up to, then you start consciously thinking every time you go to buy that, it's like, wait a minute, do I really need this? Is this a need or is it a luxury? I'm a big believer you need to have some luxuries to survive in day-to-day work. Let's say, for example, you really like to have a latte for lunch. Let's just say that, or on the way to work. And that's what really is a reward to you, and you get through the day better and this, that, and the other. Well, part of the reason why we work is to be able to enjoy life. And if you can't enjoy, so where's that line? Is that a luxury, or is that something that little reward that you give yourself because you enjoy it and you really want it? You need to figure that out. Nobody can figure it out. Do you need a 4-cylinder car that is very maybe not the luxury you want, or do you want that luxury car that really, well, both of them get you where you want to go, but one of them costs $300 more a month than the other. You need to figure out what fits in your luxury versus need. Now, this is just a simple flow of budgeting, and what I want people to really think about is the income and expenses get you to a deficit and a surplus. Now, in reality, there's like 5 different categories here. You see how there's a red deficit and a green surplus. Well, that red deficit could be like really bad deficit. You're just not controlling your expenses and you're in really bad shape. The other one is a very little bit, just a couple $100s a month, but you're not really getting into a surplus. You can't save if you're not, building at a surplus. There's people that are just barely breaking even. They're just, well, the problem there is eventually they're going to get knocked off that shelf a little bit as far as, staying on target. Then you have somebody that's just kind of doing well. They're saving a couple $100s a month, but that's not going to get you to where you want to go. And then you have the people that are, whether they make more money or they really work on their expenses, where they're able to save quite a bit of money and really reach their goals, whatever those goals are. And so it's key for you to take a look at your income and your expenses and really figure out year by year, you can go month by month, week by week even, to really find out where you stand on that deficit to surplus balance. And are you really bad off? And there's a lot of people that go into major debt because they just don't pay attention till reality kind of hits them, pretty harsh. Other people, they know they're struggling, they're just little, but they don't know how to fix it. Well, that's where you dig into these numbers. But then you have people that they did a good job getting out of the deficit, but they want to do better. They're saving a couple $100 a month, but I really want to save, $500 or $1,000 a month more. And you can really work that. And like I said, clarity is one of the biggest tools that people can use to really benefit your situation. Once you start getting this into a positive cash flow, before most any other goals you have out there, I highly, highly recommend everybody have a strong emergency fund. Now, emergency funds are really broken up into two types. On the left, you see there, I'm in a car accident. The guy left. He didn't give me his insurance card, and now guess what? I'm stuck paying for this thing myself. Or you have a health issue, or you have a medical issue, or whatever it is, you need to pay that deductible, or you need to, whatever you need to do. The furnace goes out at home. You need the roof repaired, or whatever it is. Where's the money going to come from to pay for these instances that you might need $2,000, $5,000, $10,000 to get it fixed? So for most everybody, I would like everybody to, back to this surplus, get a surplus so that you can start building that emergency fund first and foremost. The second level of an emergency fund is, what do you do if you were to lose your job? How are you going to pay the mortgage? How are you going to take care of all of those base living expenses that you need to do? Remember, we talked about luxury versus need. Well, obviously the luxury expenses are going to drop down because you just don't have the income now, but you still got to pay the mortgage, the car payment, child care, whatever it is that you need to do. We're going through an unprecedented situation right now where that is very, right in front of us and live. So hopefully people that are going through that situation, they have some of this money set aside to be able to withstand some of these months that they're going through, to make it, to the other side. So it's really critical. Now, as far as how much money to put aside, well, how long would you be out of work, right? 3 months, 6 months? And so if you're in a position where you think it's highly likely that you could get a job pretty quick, maybe it's closer to 3 months. If you're the sole breadwinner and the spouse is staying home with the kids, let's say, one way or the other, well, guess what? Now you don't have the other person's income to fall back on. Well, then you better make that 6 months to 12 months. Regardless, you need to go ahead and have that money available, and you don't want to rely on retirement plans and some of these other things to take withdrawals and pay penalties and all this stuff. And we'll get into some of the changes that have happened that make it a little bit more liquid for you to be able to reach. One of the things I want to make clear here is regarding Roth IRAs. This is a very important piece for a lot of people. And Roth IRA, I want to make this clear. It is a tax code titling. It is not a specific investment. A Roth is a code, it's a titling that allows you to put money into an account, and that money goes in on an after-tax basis, so you don't get to write off the taxes. But as long as you grow it over time and you take it out properly, then those gains could become tax-free, similar to like a 529 plan. You can invest it many different ways. So you put the money into a Roth, but then you could invest it in a bank CD or a mutual fund or a stock. So don't confuse the titling with how you invest it. So you wouldn't get a 1099 at the end of the year telling you how much taxes you owe, because it's being tax deferred or tax free depending on how you take the money out. It's easy to contribute to. It's $6,000. Even if you have a plan at work, you could be eligible depending on your adjusted gross income, which you see as the second point there. And then contributions, again, they're not deductible. Growth is tax deferred and tax free if withdrawn properly. Contributions, this is where this is nice. Contributions, they're tax free and maybe withdrawn at any age because it's money that you have put in on an after-tax basis. So one of the reasons why this works good for an emergency fund is that you can put money into a Roth IRA, but if you have a car accident, you could access those dollars, those contributions, without paying taxes on it, and it's liquid to you without the 10% penalty, because you're returning to yourself the basis that you put in. So let me give you an example. If you put in $6,000 and it grew to $7,000, you can't touch that $1,000 of growth without having possible ramifications, but you could access the $6,000 you put in. So you need to track the basis and how much you put in and what you've withdrawn. And those are done on a first in, first out basis. And then make sure you try to make these contributions. If you have $50,000 in a taxable savings account, you can actually just move $6,000 or $7,000 if you're over 50 over to the Roth and just put it in the same type of savings account. You don't even have to worry about your cash flow. It's just a matter of, if you don't do that every year, if you're eligible, you can't go back and make it up on the years that you missed out on. So just be aware that I'm a big believer that these types of an account, because if you don't use it for an emergency and it all works out well, guess what? It grew tax-free for retirement. So it's a really good hybrid vehicle for people to use as an emergency fund or a retirement account, or an emergency fund. It could be any of your goals, buying a new house, it could be used for college. There's lots of reasons you can use it for any reason, but you just have to track that basis and make sure you're doing that accurately. Just a couple of quick notes. Don't forget about retirement. I believe that the emergency fund is critical and probably the most important thing you need to focus on first. But it shouldn't be a hard goal for people to reach. Again, if you need to put $10,000 to $50,000 in there and you don't use it, well, you can use it for retirement. But it needs to be available there for you without penalties and those types of things. But at the end of the day, you need to keep focusing and keeping an idea of what your long-term retirement looks like. And it has a big say in the types of changes and decisions you'll make today. What kind of retirement do you want? When do you want to retire? How long will it last? These are all things that people think about, but to actually put it on paper and have a feel for it is really critical to make sure that you are making decisions all along. And for those of you that are younger, take a look at your long-term projections, because it gives you an idea that, oh wow, if I stick to $500 a month or $300 a month for 30 or 40 years, I can retire when I'm 55 or whatever the number is. The older you get, you better get a look at this sooner than later, because you need to make corrections as soon as possible. And interestingly, I have a lot of clients who are 65 or 70, and they say, man, I wish I would have looked at this when I was 50. You know, so if you're 50, don't think it's too late, because a lot of people sit there and look back and go, wow, I wish I would have started this sooner. So make sure you address this. If you wait too long, obviously you don't have as much time to be able to fix it. So you really need to be concerned, careful about that, and just be aware of what your long-term projections look like. This picture here is just a visual. Now, being that you guys have a state pension, most of those that are listening, I believe, you have an underlying benefit like Social Security that is giving you a guaranteed income for the rest of your life. If that satisfies all of your income need in retirement, well, then maybe you don't have to have any additional savings put aside. If your pension's $100,000 a year for the rest of your life, and your expenses, because your house is paid off and all of these things, and you only need $50,000 a year, well, maybe you don't have to worry about savings, but you better find that out first, of course. But for most people, they need additional savings to meet their luxury level, their standard of living, their travel, whatever they want to do in retirement, second home, whatever it is. And so it's important that you get an idea. So take a look at this picture way on the left. That is, assume this person is 50 years old and their portfolio, let's just say it's 200,000. Well, the projections show that that needs to grow to retirement to 500,000. And then in retirement, you will slowly spend that down to zero. Even if you run out of money, you're still going to have that pension, but is that pension high enough to satisfy all of your income needs? It is critical that people see this graph in their own life, their own projections, to see if they're on track. And what I want everybody to make sure they don't see is this graph. Let's say that you see your graph and the graph falls short. It falls short, my apologies. If it falls short by, 10 years or something of that nature, you basically need to figure out today what extra savings or what luxuries you need to give away today so that you have enough so that you can push this graph back out all the way to whatever your mortality is. And in a perfect scenario, maybe that line just keeps going up. Maybe you have more than enough. And the neat thing about that is that gives you a lot of different decisions. Maybe you retire early. Maybe you take extra trips or leave a legacy to a charity. I mean, there's all kinds of things you can do. The only thing I want there is make sure people do not forget that retirement planning needs to stay intact. Back to expenses, I want to be clear. Most people in retirement, if their plans fail, it's because they did not stick to their projected expense budget. So by having an expense budget that you work on today and become accurate and become able to truly be confident that you know what your expenses are and that you can stay on top of it. A lot of times when people make enough money, especially in their 50s and early 60s, that's when you're making your most income and they get lazy on their expenses. But then all of a sudden they retire and they never trained themselves on how to stay within the budget that they projected for themselves. And so most of those plans, so let's go back a step here. Their plan may look like this or look better, but because they did not stick to their expenses, they actually end up falling short because they didn't learn how to do it. And some of the biggest reasons why people fail, one, they didn't understand and really take into account inflation. Inflation is a huge, it eats away at the purchasing power of what you're trying to spend money on. And if you buy a car today and it's $30,000, well, in 20 years, it'll be $60,000. 20 years from that, it'll be $120,000. I mean, it really is a huge impact on what you think you have versus what reality is 20, 30, 40 years down the road. Having excess one-time withdrawals. All of a sudden, people get into retirement, they're like, you know what, I'm not as healthy as I was, and I do want to take those extra trips that before I can't do it. Well, you better project those before you retire because that's an expense and your plan doesn't care why you spend the money. You just need to be understanding that you could spend it on things that you're not projecting, so you want to put them in those projections. Here's a big one. You can't say no to family members. I have had a number of clients over the years where they just keep, and I don't want to use the word enabling, but they keep giving money to family members. And what they don't realize is they are killing their long-term financial independence for themselves. So in a semi-joking manner, I'd say, if you're going to give them that money, make sure you have them sign a contract that they're going to take care of you when you run out of money at age 80. Because that money is going to be spent one way or the other. And I'm not saying they don't need it, but you may need it as well. And you got to be really careful, how that money's spent. And it's real important to evaluate that. Poor tax bracket management. Tax bracket is just, it eats away at a lot of the net income that you receive if you do not manage it. A lot of times people can save 5 to 15% of their income by managing the tax brackets properly. And just what I mean is, if you take money from an IRA, if you take $10,000, are you paying 15% tax or are you paying 25%? And that's a 10%, I don't want to call it a penalty, but it's a lazy penalty. You're paying an extra 10% just because you did not manage it properly. And so I'm going to go ahead and fix that. My apologies, everybody. And then the failure to account for health care and long-term care and those types of expenses that you are not used to. Maybe you're caring for some aging parents that are giving you some reality on that. But if you haven't, make sure you study those and get an idea as to how you're going to pay for those. I'm 50 years old and I already have long-term care insurance because one, I want to make sure that those are covered and it's leveraged. And two, I know that if my health changes, I can't get it. I can always cancel it, but I can't get it if I have a stroke or something happens to me. So those are things you just need to consider and making sure you're understanding where your health coverage is coming from. Then now let's get to, if you're helping or going through either a family member or a spouse through a job loss, what are some things you can do? Well, first is obviously if you know your expenses, you know what expenses that you can cut and what you can't, but where do you tighten that belt? So if you're spending $6,000 a month or $8,000 a month or $5,000, whatever it is, what are those fixed and what are those luxury or what are those variable expenses that you can really cut out? Maybe you can cut anywhere from 10 to 40% so that you can really squeeze down and tighten that belt until you figure out how you're going to recover from this and either get that new job or whatever it might be. Verify available emergency funds or equity lines. Remember, all I care about is, do you have access to low cost money without penalties quickly? So if you have your house, let's say you have a $300,000 house that has $150,000 worth of equity line available. Well, that hypothetically could be a low cost access to emergency funds. So you're not putting on a 22 or 25% credit card, or you're paying penalties by taking withdrawals and things like that. So, but in general, those bank accounts, those liquid dollars that you can access at any time. Bank accounts, home equity lines, Roth IRAs, taxable brokerage, very liquid, available to help you get through the current crisis without having to pay a lot of penalties and things like that. Communicate. If we go through a financial struggle, put extra effort into communicating with a spouse, with your family. Sometimes you may try to protect your family, but in reality, you're putting a lot of stress on yourself or on one spouse or the parents alone. And it's always better to put it out. Hey, we're in a very difficult time right now, and everybody, and all those things. And usually everybody really rallies around it together. But too many times you have one spouse where they have either a lot of pride or whatever it might be, where they try to take a lot of the weight and that pressure themselves. And that's too much for one person. So just for the emotional health and all of those, but also the collaborative support and really cutting things out and being understanding if you got to do those things. And then if you need to get an advisor involved, definitely, they're great sounding boards. They'll give you guidance. They'll give you confirmations on what you're thinking is correct, maybe tax laws and different things that you might need to know about. But communicate, and that's a big thing that I really want to put out there. Obviously, filing for unemployment benefits, working on resumes, check on health insurance options, and making sure that that coverage is staying as best as possible. Understanding options from your retirement plans. If you have a 401k, 403b, what access do you have there? Couple notes on 401ks. I think 403b is the same way on this, but if you're over the age of 55 and you retire, you can access those dollars that are in that 401k or 403b account without a 10% penalty. So if you have 100,000 in your 401k and you're 56 years old, leave it in the 401k. Don't roll it to the IRA, because if you roll it to the IRA, then you might be exposed to that 10% penalty. Hardship withdrawals, those are kind of hard. You get to a pretty clear line for that. IRA 60-day rollovers might be options. You could, because they removed a lot of the restrictions where you can move money if you get a new job but you're still struggling. If you roll that money over to that new 401k, you might be able to take loans from the 401k if you think you can pay those back. So those are some of the things you could look at and try to manage some of that cash flow. A couple of the acts that have come through, we've got the CARES Act. I only put up a couple notes that really pertain to this topic, but obviously most people have heard of the fact that unemployment, they've provided an additional $600 up and through the end of July. And so that's something that if you're in that situation, take advantage of. Additional 13 weeks of federal funded unemployment through the end of 2020. And then They've expanded it to independent contractors and part-time workers to a degree. So make sure you understand those rules if you're in that situation of what the government has provided as extra availability. Now, back to what I was talking about as far as distributions from IRAs, 401ks, those types of things. One of the things that the CARES Act did is they a waiver of the 10% early distribution penalty for those that are before 59 and a half, up to $100,000 if it's for coronavirus reasons. I don't know if it's been fully, I have Nate here with me. I don't know if it's been fully described, right? Because they rushed this CARES Act through, like the PPP and some of these other things, they rushed it through so quickly that some of the validating process, some of these things hasn't been fully described.
They came out with a little more clarity recently,
Yeah.
but it's still somewhat vague.
Just be aware that if you do take advantage of these, make sure you have a professional guide, whether a CPA or somebody, a financial planner or a CPA or somebody that can help make sure that you're looking at the rules and staying on top as these rules come out and are declared and clarified and those types of things. So just, yeah, but just know that if it's a coronavirus reason, you get the virus or some of those reasons, or they can apply to the job loss, you might have access to those dollars. Expansion of limits on retirement plan loans. Back to my example, if you roll it back over to another plan and you're eligible for a loan, they've expanded the amount that you can take there as well to make access to these funds without the penalties. And then student loans, the waiver of the payment were suspended for 6 months, and also exclusion for employers, employer-paid student loan payments up to 50/50 from employees' taxable income because it's an in-kind benefit. So those are a couple things you might want to be aware of. And then also the Secure Act that was passed before this whole coronavirus situation took place. These are just a couple things that we want to make sure people are aware of. Required minimum distributions were delayed from 70.5 to 72. No traditional IRA age limit for contributions, which it was before. Extra tax breaks and deductions on medical expenses. Better clarity to employees within their retirement plans. And that is really about like expenses and performance, things like that, so people have a better idea of how they're performing and paying for those fees. Better access to plans by part-time employees, and provisions that make it easier. So they actually made it easier for some of the smaller companies to make these plans available through multiple employer plan provisions. And then restricting, this is now on the flip side, a little bit of a negative, they restrict the stretch IRA provision. So those that have an IRA, you hypothetically could continue to defer most of those dollars for up to 2 more generations beyond you. And they did a lot of restrictions there to try to get that tax money out and taxed sooner than later. So just be aware that if you did some stretch IRA planning, that you need to look at some of those are grandfathered for the initial, but not correct for the multiple. Well, we'll get into that. Do you know if the stretch was set up all the way to the 2nd generation, is the 3rd generation still eligible? Or is that
No, it's only the person.
So there's limitations on the grandfathering there as well if you were involved with that. So if you already have a stretch IRA, make sure you check into those rules. And that's pretty much a review. And I tell you what, I can't believe I hit it on my 40 minutes right on the nose, which is what I was trying to do. So I think we can go ahead and, Nicole, are you there? We can turn it on to take some questions. And again, I have Nate Quilter with me, and he does a lot of work with employees at Ohio State as well. And anything we can do to answer your questions, we'd be happy to do that now.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. That was great. Very good information for everyone to have. Just a reminder, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box, and we will get to them in just a second. I just want to mention everyone will be getting a follow-up email after this, probably Monday, and it will have an evaluation. So please take a couple minutes to fill that out to help all of us better our programming. All right, Jay, we had a couple questions coming in. The first one is there ever a time when a debt consolidation loan to pay off credit card balances makes sense?
Yes, and by the way, I had my chat off. It was on presenter, so I don't have any of these recorded. My apologies. So you are going to have to read those. I didn't see any of them come through. I had all panelists, not attendees, so I didn't get to see this. So yes, debt consolidation can be a great tool, and there's multiple reasons why. I'll put first one big caveat that you have to be careful on is like student loan consolidation. When you hear, and I made this mention before about the 6-month waiver of payments for student loans, those are for the federal government student loans. If you do a consolidation with a third-party company, you are no longer in that world. You are basically taking those assets out of that government loan world and you put it into the private world, and you made that outside of those loan provisions that you read, hear on the news and what I even mentioned there. Debt consolidation is an incredible tool for you to help control not only cash flow, but really helping your credit. Let me give you an example, and I'm going to try to keep this as short as possible because there's a long dialogue here that you can get into. But the first thing is, if you have high interest rate credit cards, for the most part, they are a very, very bad hindrance on your credit rating. Having credit cards isn't a bad thing. Having lots of credit cards with lots of debt on there, paying 22% is a bad thing. And so you really have a high difficulty of getting not only those paid off, but also because you're paying so much in interest, but also it's going to be hard for you to get lower rates because it hurts your credit. So it's one of these vicious cycles. If you have an opportunity to do consolidation, even if it's from 22 to 10%, and you're able to convert it from a open-ended credit line, which is what credit cards are, revolving credit, to an installment loan. And really what installment loan is where you actually have an amortization where every payment is a interest rate and principal, and you are set to have it paid off over 3 years or 5 years or 10 years. Your home is a installment loan. Most cars are installment loans, things like that. But credit cards are revolving. If you're able to convert a high interest rate revolving into a lower interest rate installment loan, not only did you save on interest, you have a plan to get it paid off, you probably are paying a lower monthly payment, but also you did a great thing to help your credit because they definitely look more positively on installment loans than they do revolving credit. And one more thing with revolving credit, be careful of using a lot of the department store credit cards. If you're going to use credit cards, try to use ones that are Visas, MasterCard, things like that. They're looked on a little bit more positively because of the way department stores, in my opinion, somewhat take advantage of people while they're shopping. And they make money either way. They make money on the sale plus the interest rates, and the credit bureaus understand that. But you'll see, when you do that, you'll see your credit, FICO score, and some of those things, you'll see that move up pretty quick if you're able to get that consolidation.
Great, thank you. All right. The next question is it better to put saved cash intended to start an emergency fund into a Roth IRA or a 403B?
Well, back to what I was saying before, it's weird because I'm a big believer you have to have almost 50-50 on both. You need to always be focused on retirement, because if you don't, it'll come up and get you quickly, and all of a sudden you're not thinking about it. But not at the cost of not having an emergency fund. So I think the emergency fund is actually first, unless you have a plan that gives you match. So for most employees of the university, for example, if you're PERS or STRS or CSRS, you're getting already a state match on those funds. But with the 403B, 457, you're not. And so therefore, that is for retirement. If you want to pull money out, you have to pay penalties or deal with some of these potential restrictions. I personally would focus more on the Roth IRA or even a taxable account first until you get up to a certain level on the emergency fund where you feel comfortable that you have that money available, then start feeding back into the 403b, because you may you may not need that money because you have the other 10 or 30,000, 50,000 in either a Roth or a taxable account, because you have that liquidity benefit. You can still invest it as aggressively or conservatively as you want, but it's more liquid without penalties from the IRS, and it's just more available. So until you get up to that 10, 15, 20, even there, I would still try to maximize the Roth. The younger you are, the older you are, if you have a higher taxable income and you really want the deduction, hopefully you would have built up the emergency fund by that point, and now utilizing the tax deferral of a 403b deductible as opposed to a non-deductible Roth might be a bigger benefit to you. But everybody is a little different based on what their situation is, what their income is, what their taxable income is, how close they are to becoming retired. So there's a lot of variables there, and that's one of the benefits of taking a look at financial independence, because it brings that all together for you to really take a look and see which is best for you. But in general, keep it probably liquid, taxable, Roth until you get it to a point where you're comfortable before you lose that liquidity that you might have in a 403b. But I'm a huge advocate of 403bs, don't get me wrong. But if we're talking emergency funds, make sure you don't put yourself in a situation where you pay a big penalty and get that money out.
Great. Next question. I found it interesting that people are so focused on retirement accounts, but why don't we focus more on creating investments for cash flow so we can retire before age 60?
It's an interesting question. The reality is that savings is savings. If you save in taxable accounts and not in retirement accounts, I don't have a problem with that. If you want to save in retirement accounts, you get to deduct that off of your taxes today and the gross. So therefore, you receive some tax benefit today and tax deferral to retirement. Everybody has to decide what is best for them. So I want to be very careful. I want people, this goes back to clarity and tax bracket management and having an understanding. And it also depends on how you want to invest. I mean, if you want to invest in rental properties, well, you can't do that inside a 403b, so that has to be done outside. If you, and then you create income through that resource. One of the things we teach a lot of is tax bracket. We talk about that age 59 and a half to 70 and a half, which is now 72, where that's kind of like the free zone, where how much money did you have built up in taxable income versus retirement tax deferred, and you really want to start taking out some of that tax deferred because you don't want to be hit with higher taxes when you're 72 and you're forced to take these out. So that's always a big issue. The other thing is, in retirement plans, you lose the benefits of long-term capital gains and dividend rates. So if you benefit by capital gains rates, which caps out at 20%, but you're at at an ordinary income rate of 35 or some higher number, you basically are giving up a little bit of that capital gains benefit and legacy step-up basis for inheritance for the benefit of tax deferral. So your question is vague enough that there's a lot of different ways you can take that, but I think it's valid in the sense that don't blindly just invest into one thing because you think that's the right thing to do. Everybody does have a different way depending on how you invest, what your situation is, and how you apply different titling and deferral and investment vehicles for your situation. So I think it's a great question, and it really is almost like a conversation for an hour amongst itself. So I think it's a great question, and just know I am not a proponent that you must use any one investment at all. the more that you know, you pick the ones that are best for you and you balance those out to have a nice diversification.
Awesome. Thanks, Jay. The next question. Could you please expand on what the pension will look like for being 30 years old and working at Ohio State for, say, another 20 plus years? What would that look like in regards to how much the pension would be and how that process plays out?
I'm going to have Nate kind of talk about that a little bit, but I will caveat this a little bit. That is a lot of a very specific kind of a situation that we got to be very careful of because again, we don't have any personal information, so we can talk a little bit vaguely on that. He's off camera here, but Nate, go ahead.
Yeah, so generally, depending on which pension option you chose, but if you're in the traditional type of pension there, the formula that both STRS and OPERS use is 2.2% times years of service times final average salary. So just a quick example, if you work there 30 years and you're eligible for what they consider an unreduced pension, then at that point you'd be getting almost 2/3 of what your later on in career salary is. So if you think your salary will remain pretty consistent, you're just going to get cost of living raises, then you could project it pretty well. If you're early on in your career and you think you're going to get big bumps in pay with promotions, that could have a pretty significant impact. But it's basically whatever you're ending, depending on which group you're in, A, B, C, all that. But basically 2.2% times your final average salary times your years of service is the way to kind of get an estimate of what that amount would be. And you can see it on your statements. Each year you should get a statement from OPERS or STRS that give you an estimate at different ages what that amount would be. Now, if you're part of the ARP, the Alternative Retirement Plan, you need to make projections on what the investment gains would be based on how you're allocated.
And that's a great answer, and it really, again, puts into play another concept that everybody needs to understand here is that while we work with the state pension plan, there's no better resource than the pension system itself. So if you have any specific questions or concerns on those projections, we work with it quite a bit, but again, sometimes it's best to go right to the resources. We work with Social Security a lot as well, and no matter what, when you get ready to do that, you got to go to the Social Security Administration as well to go ahead and do all the signing up and projections and things like that. So make sure you definitely also reach out to them as well. But we're able to give some guidance, but it's definitely personal, and I appreciate the question.
Thank you both for that. We have another question here. If I'm trying to pay off my house in the next 5 years, what vehicle would you suggest to put money in to earn interest, but would be able to not pay penalties?
And I see this question. I'm assuming there would be tax implications. I just don't want to keep it in a savings account with inflation. Again, I need to be really careful because I cannot give investment advice in a situation like this in the sense of specifics. But for tax issues, I would definitely stay in a non-deferred type of situation or a Roth. So both of those would give you the liquidity to be able to pull those assets out over a 5-year period. If you are somebody who is very conservative, there really are two types of ways to go. One is fixed, like a 3 or 5 year bank CD or cash accounts that you can grow. But like you said, in your question, inflation is going to eat into that a little bit. I will say over 3 to 5 years, I'm less concerned about inflation than I am about the savings schedule that you do to stay on target there. Usually for emergency funds, I actually some people don't like this, but I actually don't like people to worry too much about the investment or staying up with inflation for short-term savings, because this, how you put money aside and staying on top of your budget gets people closer to their goals than worrying about how it's invested. So that's just something to think about. But if you're conservative, obviously that is one way to go. You could set up a brokerage account and do a conservative allocation there. It obviously might have a little bit more risk than what your bank accounts might give you, but a brokerage account, you might have some conservative bonds, maybe some conservative equities, and a balance there with some cash. But you might get a higher rate of return that might be higher than you get at the bank, but it might keep you up with inflation or beat inflation. But now you have some of that volatility, even in the bond market, even in conservative markets, you could see some losses there on a short-term basis that you might not recover from. So you're taking a little bit of risk there. And if you're more comfortable with that, if you have more than enough money sitting aside that you can access different accounts if you needed to, then you might be willing to take a little bit more risk. That over 5 years, the average of any fluctuations in the market would give you a balance that is higher than inflation and meet your goals. But you got to be a little more careful there to make sure that, like right now, they're talking about in the current climate, there's so many people out there doing these day trades. My apologies. We have a VoIP system here, and I don't even know how to turn it off without being able to hear Nicole. So, but you really got to be careful that you're balancing these, because people are out there, and this happened in the 90s as well, where people thought they could invest in anything and not lose money. Well, with this market correction, we're getting a lot of these day traders, and I heard that one story about a person that was on margin and committed suicide. I mean, it's just a really sad situation. So keep very focused, keep focused on the savings habit before worrying too much about the rate of return, but don't lock it up in 403Bs or IRAs or things like that if you can't get to the money. So therefore, Roth and taxable accounts is where I'd probably stay there.
Great.
And thank you for your question.
All right, we are almost at the hour. Do we have any last minute questions? Can type them into the Q&A box.
You had one person raise their hand. Aaron, want to have you tune in there?
Go ahead.
Oh, there we go. Aaron, you are unmuted. Oh, hold on. Maybe not.
That was
Oh. What just happened there?
Josh, I can hear you, but I can't hear anybody else.
Okay. I just had her on here and she disappeared.
I'm going to lose Nate here. He has another meeting. In case there's a specific pension plan, I'll have to defer on that. But I'm willing to stay here a little bit longer. If we can get the question, I'm happy to help out. So that's however you guys want to handle that.
Yeah, we have one more question that came in, so I'll go ahead and read it to you real quick. Could you say what the retirement was again? 2.2% times annual salary?
The gentleman that just left is the one that said that. I believe he said it was 2.2 ending salary and then multiplied by the years of service. But please don't quote me on that. I might have to get that confirmed for you, but I believe that's what he said.
All right. Any last minute questions?
Thank you, Trevor. My
Yeah,
memory
confirmation.
sucks.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jay, for taking the time to present. This was awesome, great information. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate the opportunity to share some of this with you and happy to help out. And I'm sure we'll be talking to you again soon.
Everyone have a nice weekend.
Take care.